Welcome, everybody, to this very special episode of the Not Another Yoga Class podcast and LinkedIn Live series. Today, we have my friend Gregory Antonios. And before we kind of kick off with this week's subject, it's an extremely interesting one. I want to give Gregory the opportunity to introduce himself. So please, Gregory, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, Jamie. First, I'm really happy to be here. It's gonna be an interesting one, I think, and that links to the topic. We're gonna talk about boredom today. I'm a scientist, so what does boredom mean for a scientist? I've had a career where I've been in research, so I've done like work in the lab myself. Then I've coordinated some projects, um, and the difference there is that I always wanted to know how things work. I was curious, like at some level, you run a project as a scientist, and then you can coordinate people doing work. And then if you go to other places like in management, you're strategizing, you're visualizing what this means. And so I got interested in knowledge, and I have a master's degree in intellectual property, which is also like a bit of a different thing as well. So the overarching theme here has always been curiosity. Um, Now I'm very curious about how people can feel better in working environments that are research environments as well.
Amazing. I mean, we started this conversation. I said to you, look, we're tackling some really big subjects on this podcast. We're looking at menopause. We're looking at grief. We've looked at divorce. There's lots of different subjects that we're touching on, and today was really
Yeah.
interesting for me because it was boredom, which, when you kind of first think about it, doesn't necessarily feel like a corporate or organizational issue, but it really is, isn't it?
I mean, it's not assumed to be an organizational issue because you don't want it to be an organizational issue. If the headline from the board down, so that trickles down, is efficiency, boredom and efficiency cannot be in the same sentence together. So it's assumed that it's not there. we are we try our best to be efficient and to knock that one out of the picture, actually, like if it's there at all. um, but it is, and in the past 4 years I've been wondering, what does that mean for people that are very curious? I work with scientists, with intellectual property attorneys, with people that do business development for science, marketing for science. They're creative, they connect dots and ideas together, so they're curious. What does boredom mean for them?
Well, exactly. I mean, I said to you, I saw a post a couple of days ago, and it was a brilliant post, and it said, "Look, your employees aren't lazy; they're disengaged, and they're disengaged because of this reason, this reason, this reason." And one of those
Mhm.
reasons was boredom. And so, kind of tell us what the bored employee looks like. Like, what is that? How is that person performing?
And the interesting thing about big organizations is that you've got quarterly meetings with your line manager, right? And then there's a yearly meeting in which you talk about perspective and things about the year and objectives and what was reached and what can be different and so on. So here's effectively what the board scientific employee looks like. Every single one of their quarterly meetings says they're doing great. Their objectives are fine. Their objectives are actually undefined. They're vague and broad in nature. They're not specific. Then, if they bring something in and people say that's fine, they go into a loop where, well, this seems to be what they need. This level of engagement seems to be what they need. In a different setting, that looks like um, not being able to contribute to strategy and to sort of have ownership of your work. Scientists don't talk about ownership of their work, but we feel that. If you work on something for a decade, you feel it. It's a job that you're growing with, and you want to do it with love. We don't admit it. We think we're growing it with our brains, but we're growing it from here. So in bigger complex organizations where lines of reporting are very entangled, so there's no clarity about who does what where, and this is much more common than anyone thinks. Again, we assume efficiency, but with higher complexity, efficiency becomes a very difficult thing to manage if communication is not managed well. Also, if communication is not managed with empathy. So that's what it looks like at a couple of different levels.
This seems to be a theme throughout both series. This layer of communication and empathy, providing someone the environment in which they feel comfortable enough to tell you what they need. And I think there's two layers to this for me. There's, first of all, people probably don't realize that they are bored or intellectually unstimulated, possibly. And then they're not necessarily being given that environment in which they can go, do you know what? I need to be stimulated. This needs to be interesting for me. As someone who suffers with ADHD, and when I say suffer, I mean almost always in this context, if I'm not being stimulated, it's a problem. It's a massive problem. Can you tell us a little bit about a time when you didn't necessarily feel stimulated, when you were bored?
Where to go?
Or at least how did it manifest?
One specific thing was really doors to learning. When you sign contracts in industry, and I'm being very specific here because why not? Why not talk about what our contracts look like? That's work culture after all, right? In contracts in industry, at least in my experience, nothing is said specifically about a budget that is allocated to your learning, so to your development. Okay, there are no numbers there. There's numbers for a base salary and a bonus, and numbers for bonuses also can be vague, but there's no specific number that's assigned to your learning. Because then I would go, okay, I've got 2,000 a year, and this number is low because I was making around 80K a year. So to me, this is a percentage. How much should you offer them from their base salary for their development? So 2,000 for me would be actually very little. That's like going to one conference, in other words. So that was never offered. And during 4 years, I repeatedly asked for a budget but didn't receive one. And got vague answers about why there is no budget. Of course, the entire industry at that time was going through an upheaval, and still is. So numbers in pharma are going down. Research money is being cut worldwide. There are reasons for this. They just should have been communicated a bit better. So access to learning and personal development, coaching, for example. I have paid for my own coaching for the past 4 years. That has led to tremendous personal development for me. And I'm even training to become a coach myself because I saw the benefit of what that can do. If managers were coaches, whoa, what could that do in terms of return on investment? Right? And that to me was part of like a personal budget that I could use for my development at work, which wasn't offered and wasn't offered for 5,000 other employees too. I know that this is where your work comes in. Give them access to things like this through a format that's affordable to the organization, right? Have you worked with scientific organizations? I'm really curious to know about that.
Scientific, no. But I would love to. Probably for the reasons that you're defining.
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, the majority of it's not unfortunate, but it's a trend. The majority of the industries that tend to reach out to us are industries like professional services, tech, energy. These type of high growth companies are the ones that normally gravitate towards an organization like us, because I consider ourselves a step ahead of what other well-being providers are offering, right? So what about in terms of, is there any kind of physical symptoms that you would note when it comes to boredom? Things that people might be able to relate to, am I bored? Am I understimulated?
So, and this is something that I've read in what you're doing as well, making people aware of certain types of chronic pain, right? And what I have, for example, is a form of arthritis, and it's weird to me. Was weird at least. But I always saw a connection between boredom, my body being restless, and me feeling like this doesn't feel good. But I had never connected it to boredom itself. The fact that if I stand up, like I learned to do years after, um, just that fact decreases boredom a little bit because I'm moving my body a bit, right? Um, and so to me, that was a very noticeable thing. Like boredom trickled down to me physically feeling uncomfortable. I do also have gut issues, so this is all connected. That's normal. And on a on a deeper psychological level, this boredom or disengagement made me feel less worthy overall for a big time in the organization because I didn't get why I couldn't learn, you know? And until I understood that better, that it was, partly me and partly the organization. It comes from both. Um, but that was a psychologically very difficult period of a year, for example, which coinciding with us having a daughter. So like it was a woo type of roller coaster. Um, but the good thing about changes that happen at the same time in personal life is that it compensates for some boredom.
Yeah. I personally find that I am never happier than when I need downtime, which is rare. When almost always I'm restless. I'm always wanting to do more, find out more, learn more, discover more, fill every 5-minute gap I possibly can. This could be symptomatic of ADHD. It could just be the type of human brain that has developed in 2025. I'm not sure. It could be both. But what the moment I know is I want to do nothing, which is incredibly rare. That's what do you think organizations can do in a kind of scalable sense? Because a lot of employers and managers are going to be watching this. So what do you think that they can do in that's scalable to prevent boredom and subsequently disengagement?
Open access to learning, make it very clear in your contracts with people what that means for them. It's an immediate indication to someone who is curious that there's really a budget for you to do that. We want to help you close that gap of boredom by learning. And also let them follow a bit of their own. Allow them for a part of that personal development, may be not to be directly linked with your organization. If they talk to a therapist, for example, about ancestral or behavioral issues, that is going to be a return on investment for you in the organization. It will be, because they are going to elevate their behavior as a person, how they talk to others, how they understand others. All of that is going to trickle down just by you saying, we're paying for therapy. Oh, do whatever you want, for example. Or we're paying for coaching. Speak about whatever you would like with a coach. So not only have it restricted to the organization's needs, because that's what I've seen currently. They bring in a coach to work with a team to meet a very specific goal. And I've spoken to coaches that are telling me this is very difficult because as a coach, you want to prioritize the well-being of your direct client, the employee. And if the organization sets a sort of restriction on that, they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're decreasing the return on investment that can happen by simply saying to the coach, talk to them. That's it.
I mean, this comes back to developing the person, right? It comes back to what is the individual's needs. It's the same theme throughout every episode. We always end up coming back to it. It's quite nice, actually, that we can have a running theme throughout each season.
It's lovely. And I think personal development leads to organizational development.
Yes.
They're linked. And if you open the door to that, I think it'd be transformative for organizations.
I agree. I think when you meet someone that is being developed well as an individual within an organization and you hear them talk about the organization they work for, it's in incredibly positive terms. Have you found that?
Yes, because there's learning in everything. Because during my past 4 years of finding myself hitting ceilings and having dissatisfaction, I got to a point where I'm like, I'm really grateful for this experience now. The amount of learning that came from it was tremendous. So all I have or feel is being grateful. I learned a lot. I came out with a lot, and now I'll see what happens. So yeah,
amazing.
I get that.
What a brilliant way to end this episode, Gregory. Look, this was a fascinating episode for me to explore. As I said, we normally end up tackling what are essentially buzzwords, rightly so often. This is a little bit more nuanced, and it was very close to home as someone who is extremely curious. So thank you so much for bringing this to the table.
It was a lovely discussion. Anytime.
Cheers, Gregory. Bye-bye.
Ciao.